Hello. Great to see all of you here today. My name is Jennifer Jackson. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Actian, which is a division of HCLSoftware. This is my colleague, Emma McGrattan. She runs engineering and product as the Senior Vice President of Engineering and Product at Actian. We are really excited to be here today to talk with you about data prep and data readiness for Gen AI, some of the things that we've learned and discovered over the last year or so.
What gives us the credentials to be here, JJ?
Excellent question, Emma. Emma and I, between the two of us, we have about 60 sort of makes you cringe, 60 years of experience in the data market. So we've seen a lot of hype cycles in those decades, been through almost everything you can imagine, right? Been there, done that. That shapes the perspective that we have as we talk to you today, as does the company that we work for. So Actian is the data and analytics division of HCLSoftware. And it's been around for a long time. We've got a rich history in data, 50 years in the data space, helping customers connect, manage, analyze, and now govern data. So we're really excited to share through that lens what we've learned about data prep for Gen AI. So let's get started. If you look around Big Data London, Gen AI is everywhere, right? It's omnipresent. It's at every booth, it's in every hallway conversation, every presentation. So people are totally tuned in to Gen AI. So much promise. It's like the hype cycle of our lives. But Emma and I talk about it really being more of a paradigm shift, right? Changing the way work happens and the way we operate in the world. So through that sort of paradigm shift and the disruption that Gen AI brings, there come pitfalls and risks as well. And with Gen AI, it's really interesting because that old adage, garbage in yields garbage out, is amplified with Gen AI by the fact that what comes out doesn't look like garbage. So it's really important to get it right and to prepare for it and think through it with deliberate, thoughtful planning. How do we see our customers preparing for Gen AI, and what are the use cases that we're seeing?
So typically when we talk to customers, they start with very easy use cases, right? They equip their engineering organization and IT with Copilot-like capabilities, and they're able to elevate the quality of the work that's being done in those organizations. We also see customers building bots, right? We get a lot of bots that are multilingual, incredibly intelligent, have the ability to support customers 24/7 and answer some of the more complex questions that one may anticipate coming in from a customer base. We also see a lot of it in marketing applications, right, and generating campaign content. You can tell when content's been written by Gen AI, so it's another use case where you need to have a human in the room and make sure that it's copy edited to sound like something you want to read and something that's been written by a human. But those very simple use cases, obviously, are not using the crown jewels of the business, right? Your customer data, your patient data, your partner data, right? And where we see customers being very deliberate in proceeding with Gen AI is when there's a risk associated with leaking personal or confidential information through the applications that they're going to deliver. So our customers talk to us about some of the challenges that they see with preparing the data, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, and then also the risks they may face if they get it wrong. So we get into partnership with the customers to make sure that their Gen AI initiatives are successful.
Regardless of the use case that's out there, data prep is a critical element. And we know from our experience in being in the game for so long that that element of readiness is more critical today than ever before. So it got us thinking, like, how ready is the world for Gen AI through the lens of data and data prep? Because that's the world we live in. So we commissioned a study. We surveyed 550 business, IT, and data leaders throughout the world to really understand where is the world in terms of data readiness. The findings were pretty interesting. We found that almost half of the companies that responded are already implementing Gen AI use cases. So they are on their way. 75% of the survey participants indicated that they trust the data that's coming out of the Gen AI models they're building. And almost everyone, 87%, agreed that data is a critical element. You've got to be ready from a data perspective when you do this. So none of this is shocking, right? It's moving quickly. We've got a high degree of confidence in what's coming out, and we know data is important. What surprised us was this. 4 out of 5 of the people we surveyed said, yep, our data is good. It's above average or outstanding in terms of quality and cleanliness. And we know from being in the data space, data's hard. So it's hard to have that level of confidence, especially when you're building these models that generate new outputs. So it got us thinking, why? And we probed into this and realized that the people we talked to in this survey, the people that responded, were executives and leaders that had made commitments to the board of directors, to customers, to their employees on what they're doing with Gen AI. You need only say Gen AI in a press interview and your stock goes up, right? Like they've made these commitments and they need to deliver. So this sense of urgency sort of forces them to say, yeah, I know we're ready. I have confidence. We're good. What do we see, Emma, with our customers?
So in our customer base, when we're talking to them about data prep for Gen AI, less than 10% of them say that they're ready. I would say maybe even around the 5% mark are ready for Gen AI initiatives. Now, this is with business critical data, right? I talked already about some of the use cases where you can have chatbots and you can feed your documentation into different languages. You can generate training videos using Gen AI. All of that stuff is the easy stuff, right? The stuff where you've got to make sure that your business data is accurate and that it's going to fuel your Gen AI initiatives in a way that gives you confidence in the outcomes. That's what they're struggling with. So we guessed the number around 5%, and then we went to Gartner, who are very much smarter than us and have access to a lot more people than we do. And in their survey, they said the number's 4%, right, in terms of the data being ready for Gen AI. So this was in line with our thinking, so that was really good. But what we're really astounded by is the disparity between what the business thinks in terms of Gen AI readiness and what the people who are responsible for preparing the data think, right? And JJ and I have been doing this presentation around the world, and we typically get hunted down by people afterwards saying, how do I explain this to my leadership? Right? How do I tell them that they're deluded if they think that we're going to deliver on this initiative by the end of September? So what Actian has done actually is to put together a checklist that helps you to answer those questions. And if you visit the Actian website, you can take a look at that Gen AI readiness checklist to think about some of the issues, but it has all of those numbers that JJ highlighted on the first page of the checklist. So you can provide that to your leadership as you have the conversations about some of the complexities and some of the risks in preparing data for Gen AI. The other thing that we found that was quite interesting was a quote on the right-hand side of the screen here that came from Deloitte, right? And in their work that they've done with their customer base in preparing them for Gen AI, what they said is the more you learn about Gen AI, the more you know you don't know, right? So it's one of those scenarios. So this is completely in keeping with and in line with what we're finding in our customer base. So we suspect that it's probably true of your customers or your companies as well.
Yeah, I find that discrepancy really fascinating, right? Leaders say, yep, let's go. And then the people closest to the data are like, whoa, slow down, right? That's because they know and understand the challenges that they live in every day. We're going to talk through some of those challenges. Emma?
Cheers, JJ. So the first thing to think about is the data quality and cleanliness. And what do I mean by this, right? So if you were to take the data that we're collecting around the show floor today, right, you're going to find there's a whole bunch of gaps in that data, right? We're not collecting everything that we need to know about the people that we may want to participate in our Gen AI initiative. We'll also have challenges with data formats, right? I originally came from Ireland, where we write the date day month, year. I live in America where we go month, day, year. So if somebody says, I'll see you on 9/6, I don't know exactly when that is, right? So having some context there can be quite helpful. So looking at like how data is formatted, how complete the data is, deduplicating it, right? We have a contest going on in our booth for who can collect the most scans, right? It's going to be a massive deduplication required there, right? Where the 800 scans we got yesterday might be 250, right? But all of this needs to be done to prepare your data for Gen AI, because you don't want to be hitting your customers with 5 or 6 different identical emails, right? Based upon the fact that they got scanned multiple times at a show. So that data quality, making sure the data is clean, is probably the key thing to a successful Gen AI initiative if you're not subject to regulatory compliance requirements. Which brings us to the next point, which is data governance and lineage, right? We were here yesterday evening for the panel discussion, and one of the questions that was asked was, what happens if you ask a question of your data that you shouldn't be able to get the answer to, right? So putting that governance in place becomes incredibly important, right? Show me everybody in the organization who got a bonus over 10K last year, right? Shouldn't be able to see it, right? It's none of my business. But if you don't have the right governance in place, if you don't have the ability to identify who are the people that should be able to access the data. If people shouldn't be able to access the data, Gen AI shouldn't change any of that, right? So really important that you have that governance in place. Lineage, right? So JJ was talking earlier about hallucinations, right? So Gen AI will give you very compelling, very detailed answers to a question, and they could be completely made up, just rubbish, right? And one of the issues that we've got to be able to challenge Gen AI and ask it, where did this answer come from, right? So we need on the back end to be able to support data lineage, where we can say, where does this number actually originate from, and to have the data fabric in the background providing the support so you can identify where these answers come from. The next one here is shifting data sets. And this is, how can you as a data engineer say that you're ready for Gen AI when you've got no idea of the use cases that data is going to be challenged with, right? So when you're told by the business today, here's what we're going to do with the data, as soon as you deliver that data set, right, they've got a dozen new use cases that they want to use in that data, and it may not have been prepared for those use cases. So understanding the data set, understanding the models that you're using, making sure that as the models change, that the data is appropriate for the new models that, as they mature. So really important, when you're thinking about building your models, are you going to go very specific with the model, right? Or do you need to generalize it because of the fact that the use cases are going to change on a very frequent basis? Data mapping is where I actually started my career in the data integration space, right? We have multiple disparate systems where we're collecting information about our customers. So I would be checking in source code control systems versus our CRM system where we're tracking what the customer's asking, and providing that ability to map between systems. And this guy that may represent himself as Jimmy Ryan here and James Ryan there and Jim Ryan Sr. over here is in fact the same person, right? So putting that mapping in place so that we understand that it is in fact the same person we're speaking of has been a challenge that we've solved for a long time, right? But now all of a sudden you've got a LinkedIn picture of Jim, or he walked by one of the booths here and you want to identify who he is. So we've got new sources and types of data that now become part of the data mapping challenge. So understanding the data, making sure that you can map it in a way that makes sense is a bigger challenge with Gen AI than it had been previously because of the new types of data that we're incorporating into the systems. The next thing will be taking data from outside sources, right? So oftentimes we want to augment the data set with third-party data. Actian, for instance, has a customer in the AA, right? And the AA uses for generating quotes for car and home insurance. They'll ask you some very simple and obvious questions like, what's the address of the car that you're going to be driving, right? They're looking at crime stats. They're looking at the ability, maybe that car, could be vandalized outside your front door and so on. So there's a lot of augmentation that happens to the data that you're providing to them so they can generate a quote, right? That happens all over the place with data, that augmentation of data that's provided. But how well can you trust the data that you're bringing in from a third party, right? what has the provider of that data guaranteed you in terms of the quality of the data, right? Its suitability for the use case that you're going to use it for, the license under which you acquired that data. So there's a lot to think about there when it comes to using third-party data sets and open data sets as part of your GenAI initiative. The next thing we have on here is the accuracy of the training data, right? So when you think about the data that you're using to train your model, you've got to think, is it a large enough volume for it to actually even make sense to use an LLM on this, right? Does it make sense for me to actually generate some dummy data that I'm going to use to train it on? And what does that mean in terms of how it's going to operate if the data is synthetic, right? The other thing to think about when it comes to accuracy of training data is making sure that your training data doesn't have any biases in there, right? Because it may actually lead to a Gen AI model that's not actually going to meet the needs of the business. So a lot to think about when it comes to the training data. And then finally is the dealing with the human learning curve. And we're going through this at Actian right now because we just did an acquisition that closed last week in the data catalog, data product space. And we're learning new terminology, right? And when we think about things like a data contract, what does that mean to you? How do I understand that? So making sure that your organization is using a single vocabulary when it comes to data, right? Making sure that we're all on the same page when we talk about different data objects and assets is incredibly important. And the other thing is just making sure that your organization really understands what it is we're trying to do with Gen AI, like what are some of the possibilities, and making sure they understand terms like hallucinations and the fact that typically it's recommended that you have a human in the room, someone who with a gut feel can say, that feels about right, right? And then can check that the data being provided is in fact accurate. So these are just some of the things to think about as you're preparing your data for Gen AI, and all are included in the checklist that you can get from the Actian website.
Yeah, that's a lot of challenge to face. But we have a point of view that is the competitive advantage doesn't go to the ones who deploy Gen AI first. It goes to the ones who get it right first. So our belief is that getting there fast is important, but getting it right and fast is more important. So to do that, Emma's referenced the checklist that we've built. We're going to go through what that checklist covers and talk about it a little bit at a high level here. First of all, first part of our checklist, 4 parts, pretty simple, is to assemble the right cast of characters. Who are the people that need to be in the room when you're talking about your Gen AI model and getting your data ready? Emma, who should we bring into the room?
So our recommendation is that you bring everybody that's got a vested interest in the success of the project, right? So that's going to be the business users that are going to tell you what it is that they plan to do with this, right? Your business analysts who are going to have to actually prepare that view for the business users. You're going to have to bring in your data scientists and your data engineers and make sure that they're bought in to the success of the project as well, and that we all understand what it is that we're trying to deliver. By bringing all of the stakeholders together and making sure that we're all bought into the same end result and that we all understand some of the challenges that we've just talked about, like the fact that the business needs and use cases are going to consistently evolve, and as soon as you deliver something, they've moved on to the next set of requirements. So getting everybody together in a room, getting them bought in, and building out a plan for success is step 1 on the checklist.
You've assembled the right people. The first discussion to have is around data quality. How does your business define data quality? Every business has a different risk threshold. Every use case is different. Emma, what do we see here?
Yeah, so massive variety in terms of how we think about data quality, right? So if I log into Netflix and it missed the fact that, I stopped a show at 40 minutes last night, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to change my world, right? If I log into my bank account and it missed a deposit that was made last night, completely different, right? So the quality of the data really depends upon the context in which it's being used and the timeliness that is required of that data. So we'll always make sure that all of the stakeholders understand that for some of our data, it needs to be 100% accurate. For other data like sentiment analysis, if I ask JJ, is it hot or cold in here? We may get different answers depending upon how she's feeling at the moment, right? It's a bit warm. But sentiment analysis is really hard, right? So you say you're only ever going to be about 60% accurate or 70% accurate when it comes to something like that. So we really got to understand the context in which the data is going to be used and what's an acceptable level of quality for that data. Typically for business data, it's 100%.
Third step is something around what we call the data quality lifecycle. So managing data and the quality of that data from birth, from its inception, all the way through till its retirement. What are your thoughts here, Emma?
Yeah, so incredibly important that as we put the data through any transformation, augmentation process, right, that we understand the impact that's had on the data, that we understand every step of the way of the pipelines through which we're feeding that data, that we understand where it originated and at what point it should die, right? So all of this feeds into that data quality lifecycle. And again, for different types of data, there may be regulatory compliance requirements around how long you've got to keep it or when it must be deleted, right? If in GDPR, if you say you've got the right to be deleted, you want to be deleted, let's make sure that happens. So understanding that data quality lifecycle for the different data assets across the organization is fundamental.
And the final step is about creating that balanced strategy, the one that balances the risk of moving too slowly with the need to get there fast. So it speaks to that need to get it right first. Thoughts here, Emma?
Yeah, again, as you said earlier, JJ, it's not about getting there first, right? Because the risk of getting it wrong could be massive in terms of reputational damage, but also fines if you're in a regulated industry, right? So if you're in financial services, healthcare, even if you're in retail, right, with GDPR, incredibly important that you don't disclose information that shouldn't be disclosed, that is subject to any regulatory compliance requirements, and that you're honoring those in your strategy. But you want to get there quickly, right? You don't want to be the last person to deliver on the Gen AI initiative. So what we're all about is making sure that you get there right, but that you can have confidence in the results that you're delivering to the business.
So that's what we have to tell you. We would love to discuss our checklist or your data journey, what you're experiencing with data readiness, some of those challenges you have between the executive perspective and the data engineer or those closest to the data. Stop by our booth. We're at Y600 and 606. So we have two booths. One is a typical booth. The other is a racetrack that's an experiential demo. You can race, what are they called here?
Scalextrics.
Scalextrics.
Slot cars in America.
Slot cars,
yes.
yeah.
Scalextrics.
You can race those and you can see our technology in action. So it's a kind of fun way to experience what we do. And we would love to see you there. Our checklist is, there's a Lego Ferrari available as a prize.
And you can't win if you're an employee, apparently.
No. And
the checklist.
The checklist is available online. So we're trying to save the planet. So please go to Actian.com and download the checklist. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.